Welcome back to Daybreak. We're examining the crisis in the Middle East. We're joined by Dr. Duncan Ojwang, Nicodemus Minde, Dr. Edgar Githwa, and virtually by Advocate Wakili Evans Ogada. Wakili, I'll come to you now. We've seen Ali Khamenei killed in a strike. In your point, from your perspective, is this akin to cutting the head off a snake? Essentially, is it a devastating blow to Iran, or is it more like cutting the tail off a lizard and it will grow back?
Well, we need to ask what is a snake and who determines who is a snake. And before I answer that question, let me go to what my good friend Dr. Ojwang has just said in terms of some people wanting certain things to happen. I want to remind the viewers of what President Dwight Eisenhower said in his departing speech in 1961. He had foreseen the mess the US finds itself in today. He talked of what he called the military-industrial complex. And this is an alliance between politicians and merchants of arms and of war. And there are people who profit when there is war. So you know the companies that are dominant, and coincidentally, a good number of them happen to be either American or Israeli, that benefit from these wars. And that was what Dwight Eisenhower was talking of in 1961. That having been said, why would you go to war when the law requires you to first and foremost seek pacific means of resolving any dispute? People on the table negotiating, and you so-called preemptively strike a country that is a threat to you. And speaking of threats, now that we are speaking of threats and people threatening each other, how many times has Benjamin Netanyahu stood on the floor of the United Nations and threatened people?
Yeah.
Recent history, we have seen him menace and threaten South Africa. His own ambassador used very undiplomatic and uncivil language against President Cyril Ramaphosa, an African leader. Wasn't that a threat? Let us look at the history of the United States, its recent history in the Middle East. What happened in Afghanistan? The snake that was bred by the Americans in the name of the Mujahideen and Osama bin Laden turned and became a problem. And that is why Afghanistan is in trouble. Let us look at Libya. Why was Muammar Gaddafi taken out? We were told because they wanted to show up democracy, to improve the democratic lot in Libya. What happened after they left? Libya became a problem in terms of security for the entire region. Let's look at Syria. What is happening in Syria right now? Syria is not stable and is in constant fight. Now look at what is happening after this careless and needless fight. The Strait of Hormuz, which is a key shipping route for global commerce, is now very problematic in terms of passage. The stock markets are going to be giving us numbers, and some have given us numbers. Oil prices are up. So again, it goes to the question of who is the snake and who determines what the snake is. Nelson Mandela, for us who are watching, Nelson Mandela was characterized a terrorist by the Americans till quite late in the Clinton presidency. South Africa has always been on the short end. South Africa has always, the Americans and their friends supported the apartheid regime in South Africa, despite the fact that several thousand Africans were killed by the apartheid regime. So let us ask ourselves tough questions. Who determines the rules? And we cannot be poodles to be told go left, go right. We either operate by the rules or not.
All right. So Wakili Ogada says we cannot be poodles. But let me ask you this, Nicodemus. You've all referenced, an emerging new world order. Is it really new, or is it just Trump is saying openly what has always happened. It's just that maybe the U.S. has clothed its intervention previously, in sheep's clothing. But essentially, it has exerted its will over the globe.
But we have to agree that there was a semblance of international norms which the community of nations had agreed to post-1945, including, respect to institutions such as the United Nations, that we can, if we are aggrieved, we can take our issues to these international bodies, and we can see, for example, international law in practice. But again, we are saying that this rule-based order is broken, as my colleague has said, and of course, this has been mentioned by McCartney, and this was a direct indictment to the President of the United States in the World Economic Forum. But again, we see that it's not that the United States has changed in its form, but we are seeing the emergence of a new crown in the name of Donald Trump, who has returned American isolationism in, you've talked about the hat, the MAGA hat, that is Make America Great Again, which again is just to make America more secluded. And we saw some form of a global alliance where we saw the United States having very close collaborations with Europe, for example, to act as this almost a mirror through which the world is directed, for example, by the respect of these international norms. For example, issues to do with the use of force, collective security, and all those forms of international norms that, are aimed at, safeguarding the interest of the global world. But again, we are seeing now this is a radical shift. The United States has removed itself from many of these international institutions, so the mask is off, if you may say it. Look at the attempt to take over Greenland. The selective application of these international norms in international crises. It was just the other day that the United States was convening Rwanda and the DRC to discuss about possible resolution of the conflict in the DRC. But yet again, we are seeing a few months later an attack in Iran. But it is also, we are seeing it is this global pretense that the Russian invasion in Ukraine, as it is being termed, or what Putin calls the special operation in Ukraine, has been condemned. But should we also condemn the United States along the same lines? In a few months' time, the United States, together with Canada and Mexico, will be hosting the World Cup. A few years ago, when Russia did what it has done to Ukraine, we know what happened. Russia was kicked out of all international sporting activities. So this is what we are calling the double standards in international law application and international norms. And of course, it has really been reinforced by the emergence of a marauding power, that is the United States under Donald Trump.
All right. So, Dr. Edgar Githua, so should we just reconcile ourselves that mwenye nguvu mpishe? And I ask that because when the US went in, I don't know that call it an arrest. Maduro, there was a huge public outcry that this goes against the international order. And yet, as things stand today, Maduro remains locked up. Yeah. We have the vice president running things in Venezuela with the US behind the scenes. Israel has been condemned severally, even at the UN during the General Assemblies, and yet Netanyahu has pursued this course. So do we just reconcile ourselves to the fact that those with the military prowess will do what they will?
Thanks, that's a very good question, and I know it opens a can of worms, but it just brings us back to, and for those who are in academics and students out there, about realism. The fact that power rules international relations. Yes, the world has tried to accommodate different views and to be liberal and to obey international law. But the truth of the matter is, international law is, in my perspective, this is my individual perspective, is a tool and a vehicle for And it only works when it is in the interest of powerful states. When a rule is imposed or a norm, like Dr. Minde said, even powerful nations agree to abide by certain norms to the extent that those norms help that country achieve its interests. The moment the rule stands between a powerful nation and its interests, it puts the rules aside. That's why, based on the examples that my colleagues have given, when it is expedient, powerful nations obey the law and force all the other weaker nations to obey that particular law. But when that law stands in the midst or between the powerful nation and its interest, whatever that interest is, it puts it aside. That's why we have this debate in academia, we have this debate outside here, is that, like you rightly put it, powerful states in international relations will always do what they want to get, what they want to do.
The weak must suffer what they must.
Yeah, and the weak, exactly what Dr. Minde says. The weak, you as a small power or as an inexistent power, you just have to obey what the big countries are saying, because if you do not, they have the power and nobody can stop them. So in this case, we were having this debate, and I know I'm sounding like a broken record. We were having this debate during the break. If Iran did not ever attempt to go for this bomb, we would not be here. I know the Iranians are not going to be happy about it, but they signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty and then broke it and went and started getting it. So for any country out there, free advice, if you're going for the nuclear weapon, make sure when you pursue it, you get it. Otherwise, you are going to suffer the same consequences. So when powerful nation states feel you are trying to rise to get a particular power that will threaten their interests, they will do what they need to do to clear you out or to suppress you. So I know nobody likes having this debate, but realism as a theory, realism states that powerful nations pursue their own interests and they have power to do so. So yes, it will be the most democratic country, but if you're standing in its interest, in the way of its interests, it is definitely going to come and remove you out of the way.
It will mow you down.
It will mow you down.
All right. Dr. Ojwang, I'm curious. I'm coming back to that question of Khamenei, and this was posted by the Iran mission to the United Nations. Let me see how long ago. This is after Khamenei was killed. The hostile U.S. government's dream of swallowing the Islamic Republic of Iran and forcing it into submission will never be realized. This war, before being a contest of military equipment and advanced technologies, is a battle of wills, and in that battle, Iran will prevail. I ask you this. When we saw the nuclear, sites, hit, was it in June? Last year? Yeah. Iran made a lot of noise, but really, nothing much came out of it, right? This time round, with the death of Khamenei, is it in your perspective, Dr. Ojwang, a devastating blow? Have the US and Israel won this war before it even began?
Yeah, and that is the challenge we have, because at what point do you stand on the ship as President Bush stood and say mission accomplished? How do you define that you have won? Because in such a symmetrical war, it also triggers terrorism. And there is no end to terrorism. So if somebody like in other countries in Africa, if somebody has no power, they resort to guerrilla warfare. And that can go on and on and on. In some international atmosphere, you find that that can only radicalize and probably lead to even this other insecurity like terrorism, because people now look at that system as unfair. The international law purpose is to help us define each other's interest and protect legal interest. And that is a good place to be, that our interests are protected by law and it is determined by law. But of course, the experts here have alluded to the idea of realist. The powerful get what they must do what they must do. The weak suffer what they must. That is Thucydides or something like that. That is the realism. That is meaning the reality we are in. But there is issues. So you can analyze it from structuralist level, from realist level, from balance of power. But whichever level, it appears that there is exceptionalism where the powerful countries do what they want to do. I think Africans in this multipolar world can find how to balance their power. And that is a very relevant question. Where should Kenya come in? Where should African countries come in? Because right now you are seeing the Middle East area and flying zone are very volatile and dangerous. Maybe it is time for Africans and African airlines and African states to take advantage, because our geography is very strategic. Like, for example, Kenya. Dr. Yav spoke of, and Dr. Gada, about South Africa. You see, let us also be realists as Kenyans. If South Africa is in bad books with the US, how do we take advantage of the open market they were given, which really developed them to take their things to the US, and we take advantage as Kenya and fill that gap? Because it looks like South Africa, in this global power, has leaned towards the BRICS, Russia and all that. Kenya has remained a very strong ally, though it is multi-aligned, but generally an ally of US and Israel. How do we take advantage and leap forward and develop and move forward as Kenya with all this confusion? So the idea that this is unfair, and that's what Professor Gada is saying. But Professor, the world is bigger than it exists in the mind of international lawyers. I know lawyers like order. Like Ogada will run to suicidal thought if you tell him there is the reality that this is the law, but the operation is different, because he likes order, and that's what law is supposed to do. But I think the reality is, and you have said it here, that we live in the world where we have seen exceptionalism. Has Trump aggravated what we are seeing? Has he become less diplomatic? Has this been how US have operated? Let me surprise you. Obama did more, signed more drones hitting their opponents than any other president. But he will talk democracy. That's what America have done. Walk softly but carry a big stick. So of course, in terms of mannerism and posture, America will always talk in terms of we are coming together, we are partners, but from the Iran mission that failed, from all the history of America, we know that America have always done what is in their interest, sometimes more aggressively, but there's a pattern. And Doc here said there is, you cannot understand the US policy, but looks like their interests come first. That interest might be weaved in with your interest. They might talk of, we want to promote the world democracy, and people fall into that. But in reality, I remember during Iraq war, there was a survey in the US. Do you want the fate of Americans to be decided by the UN or by us? Of course, the answer was clear. Americans said, of course, us, not the UN. You see, Trump, what is threatening the world order is that Trump is defunding UN. Trump is almost rivaling UN. But I think the better analysis we can do is why. What is the end game? I think there is that trade war with China, and there is a proxy war here, because Iran and Venezuela and all these countries had become almost allies and partners with China. And so there's the issue of trade, there's the issue of interest.
Okay.
That is camouflaged in terms of world threats and whatever. Israel has an interest.
Okay.
They are rivaling with China, and in the process, if you align on the side of China, then you find that these countries are coming to you aggressively. Now, finally, the fear that this bring in the international order is if leaders are not safe. We saw Maduro. You are struggling whether to say, was he arrested, was he kidnapped? And the US court had said, we don't care how you get here. As long as you get here, we will try you and apply the law. So they have looked and winked at the illegality before. We are seeing the Iran leader assassinated. That sends real fear among the world leaders. And that is when now we talk of America as a superpower. That's not a legal term, but it's the reality. Okay. That's why if you find every young person is listening to iTunes, they are watching Hollywood movies, they are trying to speak English, not Chinese, they are trying to eat burger, not eat rice. That means America dominates. And that is the reality.
All right. I want to get your response to that, Wakili Ogada.
Well, I hear the language of might is right, and Dr. Juang certainly remembers the fate of the League of Nations, where powerful fascist Italy and Mussolini and imperialist Japan think they are too big to be contained in the Rubicon of order. They pulled out and started the expansionist agenda, and we know what fate befell the two countries. Italy has never recovered to its erstwhile heights. Japan was revived, but revived as a lesser power with a lot of American help. It simply shows the United States and those who believe that might is right, that there is profit, and history shows us from, and it's good Professor Juang brought this from the history of the Westphalian peace process, the Westphalia history going to the period in 1945, the League of Nations period, that there is profit in nations working together to have some semblance of order. That having been said, and before I leave the topic, there's a political scientist, an American political scientist called Professor John Mearsheimer. He writes something very compelling, and I've been reading him for some time. He writes the book, The Tragedy of Great Powers, and he gives a warning to the US, the Israelis, and all these powers that have believed that we can use gunboat diplomacy to achieve what we want. That is a warning that must be taken, that you must negotiate with others. And in the face of an emerging China, when China is coming up big in terms of its military, it's definitely the dominant economic power of the day. I mean, you have to work with others, be respectful on the table. That having been said, let's go back to the Iran question. Why is Iran a problem? And our co-panelist there alluded to it. Iran has been a problem since 1953. A democratically elected prime minister was taken out through a coup sponsored by we know who, because he did not sing the tune, and of course the issue with oil resources in that area. Let's go back to the Shura Council coming in 79. The Shah, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, who was supported by the US, was toppled because he had become a dictator. And the same story reflects even in Latin America. America will support the worst of leaders and call them allies because they do their bidding. We have the history of Augusto Pinochet Ugarte in Chile and all these dictators in Latin America that you will be supported, and in Africa, by the way. We don't forget the history of Mobutu Sese Seko in the former Zaire. These dictators all over the world. You will be supported so long as you sing their tune. And that is not going to help the soft power credentials of the United States. Instead, it breeds a lot of anger and resentment on the streets. You may prop up an elite rulership but the streets will not be with you. And the example is in the Middle East, where you support all these dictators, but the Arab street is not with you.
All right.
God. you know, he was my classmate in UON. We studied international law. I taught him international law. But he is deep in international law. But he has never stopped to not think like a lawyer. But you see, this space is controlled not by law. And that is the part that Ogada has refused to cede. That there is the world as it ought to be, and there is the world as it is.
Exactly.
All right. In this new reality, because you all have had even Dr. Githa talk about realism.
Realism, yes.
Minde. So how do we play it, us who are not superpowers? Do we just now bow down to the power that is the United States, whatever they say goes?
Of course, probably if we are to go with that theory, then there is the principle of bandwagon. So you must suffer your fate as a weak country economically, politically, also in terms of technology.
So sorry, they need to fix your mic, your sound. Don't worry, I won't ask anybody else that question. I'll come back to you with that one. Okay, Dr. Githa. I've read the papers today. I think Minde is the one who referenced it, and as well as Wakili Ogada, that show us where the US has intervened, right, to remove a quote-unquote dictator, because you're saying who determines who is a dictator and not. But, you know, the people have revolted, okay, in several of these countries, right? They remove these dictators, and then, okay, so tell us where the US has intervened, and the people are better off today than they were before the US intervened.
That's a good one. That's a very deep one. Interventions and all wars have what we call, and all conflicts have what we call unintended consequences, all right? In their minds, they might have thought that regime change is going to leave our society better. And then we run into unintended consequences. Even in this case in Iran, for example, and I think we were having this debate, I think, offline a little bit earlier on, there is no guarantee that the next leader coming in, whether chosen by, they have a very stringent method of choosing the next leader, but right now power is invested in 3 individuals. There is no guarantee that the new leadership coming in are going to be better than what you've removed. In fact, for the longest time, there's been debate in academic circles that it was better to have left Saddam Hussein in power, because when he left, the whole country fragmented. The Kurds went this way, ISIS took a huge part, and we've never had peace in that part of the world. So that's a very tricky question, Olive, in the sense that at the back of the minds of the ones who are making this intervention, they always think that there'll be democracy will take root, the people will rise up and choose their leaders fairly, only to discover that the societies they intervened in probably needed that strong man to keep them together. Let's go back to Somalia, even though I'm not saying it's the US that did that. Remove Siad Barre, or he was overthrown, he was a dictator. But the moment Siad Barre left the scene, the country fragmented. All these warlords, Farah Aidid and the rest, took up. So it's very possible, even right now in Iran, the biggest fear is that this new leadership that we think will be much better for the people, they could come and, like Dr. Ojwang said, become more radicalized, or decide, seeing this is the fate that we have brought upon ourselves, if we secretly agree we will pursue this bomb to the very end. I mean, literally with the blood of our children. So there are always unintended consequences out of all these conflicts. You can never map out a conflict or war or an intervention and know for surety this is the end game, this is what we are going to get. It is a very gray area. So that is the risk. So coming back to your question, all those interventions that were done previously and those societies have not been left in a place where they are more improved. It is that unintended consequences. You remove this person thinking that you've given these people a chance to breathe and choose another leader, only for the country to fragment into small factions, and they are embroiled in fighting that never ends. The same thing, you remove Assad in Syria. Granted, from a democratic point of view, from democracy, liberalism, he was a bad leader. But maybe that bad leader held that country together. all right, at least made them function as a society. All these people we like calling dictators across the world, my personal view is that they serve a purpose in those societies. You remove them, and that society fragments before they transition or they reorient themselves into what we'd probably call a more democratic state or a functioning state. So, Olive, that question, we can go and argue and demonize the US and say there's no place they have intervened that has turned out better. But I choose to look at it differently. Unintended consequences, there is no perfect war, and there are no outcomes as you really planned them. In fact, they say in strategic studies, when you have planned for war, the moment the war begins, all those best laid plans, perfect plans, that rule book is thrown outside. Nothing really works out the way you intended it to be. So for me, I look at it as a consequence of you planned this way, but evolution and society just shocks you. And they cannot come back and apologize and say, we are sorry, we removed so-and-so, we removed so-and-so.
But that assumes that that was the primary objective. In my opinion, because Trump was talking about objectives last night, right? In my opinion, the whole liberation thing is just a secondary objective. I think because he keeps saying, oh, this is your opportunity, rise up, rise up.
And they may not rise up, Oliver. I mean, to what you're saying, the Iranians could shock all of us, thinking that they have been liberated. The demonstrations we saw the other day, like right now, if you've been watching what's happening on media, there's a huge part of the country that are mourning the death of Khamenei. And there's a huge part that were out there celebrating. In fact, I saw them cracking out fireworks and all that. So you're left wondering, how will now this country reconcile itself? Because clearly it's like you've split the country into two. There's a part that are happy that Khamenei is dead, and there's a part that are sad that he has left. Have you caused more confusion in that society or not? Okay. And where is the guarantee that they will rise up now and have a democratically elected leader, or the leader you are thinking of trying to prop up, he will get the support?
But as I said, that to me, I think is a secondary objective.
Yeah.
Minde, the question of, in this new reality, ya mwenye nguvu mpishe, us who are not superpowers, although we are going to Singapore, we have been told. I mean, we are going, you know. Dr. Ojanga,
why are you saying it's cheap?
But how do we play
And
this?
you are not?
Of course, as I was trying to mention, that's the reality of life. Sometimes we have weaker, supposedly weaker states in terms of economy, technology. Other countries are more advanced militarily and the like. And there's a concept that is oftentimes referred to as the balance of power. So states tend to either align to certain powerful states, and we live in a post, what we call a post-bipolar world, where we are increasingly moving towards a very multipolar world, although the arguments that still the United States is the major power, if you're to look at all those indices of what really constitutes power. For example, militarily, the United States is still way above. Economically, of course, China is catching up. But to answer your question, yes, weaker countries tend to bandwagon in an effort to really balance this power. We see the role of middle powers, the likes of South Korea, Brazil, and BRICS, as my colleagues were mentioning. This is what brings this balance of power, and the world almost finds itself. But I want to go back to a question that you asked, but I think was not really covered, is on the question of whether what happens to Iran, post Khamenei Iran. And of course, we have to put these facts very right. Khamenei was not just a political figure, he was also a religious leader to the larger Shia sect of Islam. So it is a big blow. In terms of strategic lenses, I think it was you can say it was quite a victory for the United States and Israel to actually take out the Khamenei on the first day of the operations. It was not up until many years later that Saddam Hussein was captured. The same applied to the late Muammar Gaddafi. But again, if you look at the succession plan, Iran has a very clear succession plan in terms of who comes in after after Ayatollah Khamenei. But again, we also know that I tend to think, Iran practices a politics of martyrdom. I don't know if you've seen this. So they place a lot of reverence to martyrs, and I think there's also suggestion that probably the Ayatollah didn't want to go to hiding, in a sense to galvanize his base. And of course he's an 86-year-old, and now he did not surrender to Israeli and American imperialism, if you may call it, the way, let's say, Assad went to Russia. So he chose to die according to his own terms, which in spiritually, in terms of the Shia spirituality and Islamic doctrine, this is a martyr's death. So this now in some way also consolidates his base. But again, also you were to look at the choice that people make, countries make. And I like what my colleague Dr. Gidhoa has tried to put. It's what we call how countries practice their politics, and that's why we have in the UK we have a monarchy, and it is what the British people have chosen for themselves. We have democracy in the United States, and it's a two-party system. We might want to criticize that. Why is it that there are no many political parties in the United States? No, I think the United States people have actually chosen that type of system. The same way applies to the Chinese, that they have this strong leader who embodies the Chinese ethos and aspirations, and it's the same way that the Iranians have chosen a theocracy. So this is how countries conduct the politics, and we have to really understand why they do that. It is based on varied histories, and countries have very complicated histories. One of my favorite Iranian scholar by the name Hamid Dabashi talks about a people interrupted, that is the Iranians. And this is a people that have, of course, the Persian civilization is quite a rich civilization in terms of science, technology, poetry, literature, invention, and the like. But these are people who have really been disrupted by theocracy, have been disrupted by American imperialism. They have been disrupted by a big number of Iranians who have actually gone, diasporic Iranians, who have also really contributed into this whole hullabaloo. But it's also the complicated geopolitics of where Iran is situated in a very complicated region of the Middle East. If you look at that history of even the concept of the Israeli state, if you don't want to open that can of worms, as my colleague wants to put it, it is largely a historical question that really complicates the current the politics of the Middle East as we may know it. But again, I'm glad that even the conversations that are ongoing, of course I heard yesterday, I don't know the veracity of this, that the Iranian leadership under the president has reached out to Donald Trump in an effort to really have some form of rapprochement so that this thing can... Trump
said it himself. He said he's been reaching out.
They've been reaching out, which I think, for me, this is the place of diplomacy, because war is devastating and it has greater implications. And look, I always look at people who really push for this war because they are not the first culprits. People who have lived in war they can tell you the devastation of living under war. Look at Sudan, look at the Palestinian people. It is, for me, I think diplomacy should be given a chance going forward. All right.
Wakili Ogada, and I'd like to invite you to send your comments, because I'll go through them in the next few minutes, at Citizen TV Kenya, at Obarrows. The hashtag is Citizen Daybreak. Wakili Ogada, stay with me here, because I'm afraid I might lose you. I watch a show called Real Housewives of Atlanta. There used to be a character called Sheree Whitfield, and she is famous for this phrase, "Who's going to check me, boo?" Who is going to check the United States? Because the UN Security Council held an emergency meeting, but it's so divided. We've seen China and Russia call for de-escalation, but do you expect China to step in as prefect, because, considering the members of the UN Security Council, perhaps they're the ones who can stand up to the US. We've seen the UK hesitant to say they are also now part of this war, and the Prime Minister Starmer keeps insisting on the defensive action. So, Wakili Ogada, who's going to check the US?
Well, in terms of checking the US, it appears virtually hopeless right now that the US appears to do what it wants, and it perhaps appears to be getting away with it. And this is because the way the world order, the rule-based order has been structured. Because if you look at, for example, the authority of the Security Council, and that draws from Article 27 of the UN Charter. This was basically structured to keep the hegemony that draws from the victors' ascendancy after World War II. And Article 27 ensures that the US and indeed any other power within the Security Council can derail consensus. I can tell your viewers for a fact that the history of Article 27 was that any decision be reached through consensus, and that no single nation could dominate or scuttle consensus. But practice over the years has ensured that that has been negated, and it is now a question of any one country derailing consensus, and that's how the US has thrived. That being said, history again, the US needs to remember that we have had equally powerful civilizations, and all of them have gone to the dogs. If you don't learn from history to know that you need to work with others, you need to respect others, you need to cooperate with others, you will suffer the consequences. We had the Brits before the US. We had the Ottoman Empire. We had the Roman Empire. We had the powerful Ming dynasty in China. We had all these big empires that have preceded the powerful and mighty United States. If you don't learn from the failures of those empires, you will fall, you'll suffer the same consequences. And that is why it is important that the US learns that it needs to come back to the table and do the things by the book. The US, as of the Iranian war a few weeks ago, did not want to go into this war. They thought it wise to stay out and seek diplomacy. That is what they need to go back to. Let them not succumb to the appetites and the deranged proclivity that Benjamin Netanyahu and his hawkish ministers always rush the US to. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Wakili Ogada. Let's get take a look at some of the feedback we received this morning. All right, this is Sheila Sweden, who says, the big question on everyone's mind right now is, does America rejoice in ending lives of those it feels are stumbling blocks towards what they want to achieve? This is Godi Barasawere. Be it as it may, a humane point of view. The US-Israel alliance against Iran is way too brutal. Diplomatic dialogue would have been an option for both parties. This is Bob Otieno Owino. The trouble in the Middle East is majorly fueled by Iranians' threat to wipe out Israel in the map of the world, boasting about having a powerful nuclear missile they'll use, which act Big Brother America. This is Engineer Lazaro. Ministry of Foreign Affairs should be compelled to give the correct list of total number of Kenyans stuck in the ongoing escalations in the Middle East. We've another good number of Kenyans fighting in Ukraine and Somalia. This is John Musang, 7262. To all Kenyans living in countries experiencing war, may they keep safe and follow safety measures that they are given. And this is Sir Nixon Ndugire. I pray that the trouble in the Middle East will end soon as possible and that no one will take advantage of that war to artificially or excessively raise prices of goods and services within our country. All right. Lastly, have the last word, Dr. Juang, on the question of, how MFA has approached this. We have 416,500 well over Kenyans in the Middle East. They've asked Kenyans to register. At present, do you think the best approach is just to register and keep calm? Or they start packing their bags?
I get the question, but it's more of a statement. But let me briefly respond to what my colleagues have said. I also saw a T-shirt that I liked at one airport, and the T-shirt was saying, "Only Beyonce can judge me." And with that as a standard, the person is saying, I don't care what you say. But I also remember as a student in the US, I was asked, who is your favorite philosopher? And I said, Ali Masrui. And the professor was very mad. He said, the person who is saying Africa should have nuclear weapons. And I said, exactly. That's why he's my favorite philosopher. So the issue of nukes have been a problem, but that's where leadership comes. As Kenya, Kenya is an anchor state. We must leverage on this confusion to strengthen our interest. And I think that is what we are doing. Even the issue of Security Council, that Africa have been demanding for permanent member slots, including our president, saying how unfair the international world system is. And that is coming out clearly that the system is unfair and it should be reformed. Finally, I also think, you see, for America, they are a little comfortable because it's more of a proxy war. It's their allies who are being hit, mostly. It's Dubai, so the war is not really in their shore. And as long as war is not really in your shore, then it's like a video game. You are not really feeling the heat. I think the Kenya Foreign Affairs as a responsible department, I saw the PS Foreign Affairs, Dr. Singoe. I saw the head of diaspora giving statement on how to be safe. And even the Minister for Foreign Affairs, that Kenyans are all registered and enlisted, and that is the first step, because once they are accounted for, then if there is a need for countermeasure or for any quick evacuation, then the government can respond. But I think the fact that they have mapped all of them, they are talking to them, they have given them contact to tell if there is any distress, and to kind of watch and see how this thing is going, because remember in some of those airports I saw some people stuck in Dubai. The movement have not been facilitated because of the insecure air security. And that is a message to Kenyans. Be patriotic, love your country, understand that even if you are there in foreign countries, it is your country, it is that passport that protects you. And because Kenya is in good relationship with the US and all these other countries, you find that sometimes some of these big powers are also working together with Kenya along other countries to protect our citizens.
All right, so we have to end the conversation there on account of time, but that was Dr. Last word.
1 second.
Apa Naimesha.
Okay.
Dr. Duncan Ojwang, who is an advocate and who is also an international humanitarian law lecturer. We've had Nicodemus Minde, who is a researcher at Institute for Security Studies. We've also had diplomacy and security analyst Dr. Edgar Githwa in studio, and joining us virtually, Wakili Evans Ogada, who is a public international law lecturer as well. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for contributing to this conversation. You said wait and see, we wait and see, but when you say if this war is not on America's shores, it's like a video game, I worry, because already the price of oil has gone up, the shutdown at the airports, so we hope for the best. Have yourself a good day.